Hello everybody and welcome back to our Professional Development Webinar series for Parish and Diocesan Ministers. Thank you for joining us for a presentation titled Marketing Catholic Marriage in a Post-Marriage World with Greg and Lisa Popcak. My name is Jared Dees. I'm the Digital Publishing Specialist at Ave Maria Press, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. This webinar is brought to you exclusively by Ave Maria Press in partnership with the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. And questions may be sent to our presenters using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, which you can see displayed on your screen here. Please take a moment now to find that box for typing questions in your GoToWebinar panel. Simply click the send button in the bottom right-hand corner to send your questions to our presenters, and I'll read as many of those as I can at the end of the presentation today. I'd also like to note that this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent out to you later this week, so please watch your inboxes. During the live presentation, you'll be able to see the presenters' faces using our webcam feature, but the recording will only display the slides. So now that we've gone through all the technical information, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Greg and Lisa Popcak. Dr. Greg Popcak is a psychologist and nationally syndicated radio host, the author of over a dozen books, and the executive director of the Pastoral Solutions Institute. He contributes regularly to the Catholic Digest and serves as adjunct faculty at Franciscan University of Steubenville and Capella University. Lisa Popcak is the Vice President of Pastoral Solutions Institute and a family life coach, lactation consultant, and co-author of several books. She writes for many popular Catholic magazines and is a sought-after speaker on marriage, parenting, and women's spirituality in both the U.S. and abroad. So Greg and Lisa, thanks so much for being with us.
Great to be here. Thanks, Jared.
Great.
You know, I'll just tell you a little bit about. Should we just get started, or how
yeah? Let me hand over controls to you, and you can.
Oh. I'm jumping to get the controls, Jared.
Please
hand them over already. Come on.
Here they come. So click that button, show my screen, and you should be good to go.
Okay, excellent. Let me just pull this up here. Sorry, just one sec.
Looks good. I should point out to everybody, if you want to adjust the size of the webcam, you can do that by dragging the little line in between the presentation and the actual webcam display. So, Greg, please, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. You know, I just wanted to introduce us a little bit with the ministry that we do, in case you're not familiar with the Pastoral Solutions Institute. We started in 1999 when our first book, For Better Forever, A Catholic Guide to Lifelong Marriage, came out. And at that point, I was in private practice. But I started getting calls from Catholics around the country who had read the book asking for faithful answers to tough marriage and family and personal problems, just wondering if I could refer them to anybody, and I didn't have anywhere to send them. So I started doing some work on the telephone, and I thought, well, you know, this will be our little bit for the church, you know. Within 6 months, I had to close my face-to-face practice. I had so many people calling, and since then, I've we brought on at least 4 other associates, and we do about 8,000 hours of telephone counseling a year between all of our associates and us, with Catholics all over the world, doing marriage and family and personal issues. Of course, our radio program, More to Life, airs every day, Monday through Friday, from noon to 1 Eastern, 11 to noon Central, on about 30 to 35 different stations around the country, Catholic stations around the country. So we get a lot of questions about marriage, about Catholic marriage in particular, and so that's what we're talking about today. You know, just the idea of the marriage store. If you could go and in the marketplace and look around and see there are all kinds of marriage products that are available. And how do we market Catholic marriage, if you will, in a post-marriage world?
Well, we need to do this. Everyone who's listening to this will probably realizes how desperately we need to do this, because marriage in Catholicism just seems to be declining. But for us, the book came about not because marriage is declining or people are less interested in Catholic marriage, but because the people we know are so much more interested in Catholic marriage. We have kids from 21 on down to 7, and our son is a student at Franciscan University, and he brings his friends to our dinner table all the time.
All the time.
And we love that, but it's interesting because as they entered their junior and senior years, they started to ask us a lot of questions when they would come to dinner. Questions about how to make their marriage work. You know, mom and dad didn't have a successful marriage, or the marriage was pretty good, but that doesn't mean I want their marriage or know how to do it because I lived under their roof. and they knew what we did. They know what we do every day on the radio, and so they take advantage of that to be able to say, you know, how do I do this? I want my marriage to last a lifetime. I want it to be godly. I want to be able to raise godly kids in the context of this marriage. And it seems as though everyone is suffering these days, and so many people aren't making it. What do we do? So when Ave Maria approached us, we said, hey, this is a perfect way to take those dinner table conversations, talk about how it worked for us, talk about how it empirically works, and why going for Catholic marriage is so much better than anything else in that marriage store that we were talking about.
Yeah, and in this book, we usually try to take it in all of our books, and together we have over actually 19 different books and programs we published over the years. But we usually take kind of a research-based, more empirical, kind of advice-driven approach to our work. This one's much more of a Titus II kind of personal sharing, rooted in that research. But we're trying to be very personal and share our story. We're coming up on our 25th anniversary in May. And just talk to young couples or newer couples about what it takes in this third generation of the culture of divorce to have a solid Catholic marriage, not just any old marriage, but a solidly Catholic marriage, and talk about what makes that unique. And that's really the tie-in here. Although in the book we don't get into the typologies that we're going to be discussing with you today, we do talk about the unique difference that is Catholic marriage and why we as Catholics are really blessed and privileged to have this well-developed theology of marriage and what it really means to each of us as we try to live out this sacrament.
And I have to say, as we talk to college-age students who are looking at getting married, looking into launching into adulthood and want that Catholic marriage, time and again we see their eyes light up. Nobody's told us this. Nobody told us there's a way to make this work, that there's just ways to just, plug into this and have it really be that thriving Catholic marriage. So it's exciting to see their eyes light up, and it's good to know that when you let people know what Catholicism has to offer marriage, they want it. They're hungry.
Yeah, and that there's something really different about Catholic marriage that sets it apart from other relationship types. So let's get into the meat of the talk. Marriage is in trouble. I don't think that's a news flash to any of you out there today. The fact is that marriage rates are declining all over the place, universally, not just for people of faith, but for all groups. In 2013, you see the slide that says that the marriage rate is about 31 marriages per 1,000 unmarried women. So out of 1,000 unmarried women, 31 of those will get married in a year. That's compared to 1920. You see that there were 92 marriages per 1,000 unmarried women, and that's a huge difference. The onset of marriage is about 27 years now, which is the highest point in over a century. So we see, as I mentioned in the introductory comments, that in this third generation of the culture of divorce, people are much more reluctant to get into marriage in the first place, much more pessimistic about their chances to have a successful marriage, and much more doubtful about why marriage is even necessary anymore or what benefits it could possibly have for them.
Yeah, exactly. Why is this good for me? What will this be good for in the long run? Why should I choose that over the myriad of things that are available to me these days?
And unfortunately, that applies to Catholics, too. You see the little graphic there that says sometimes Catholic marriage, like all of Catholic life, is simply messy. Well, I mean, that is true on a lot of different levels, and it's true here statistically as well, because you see that marriage in the Church has fallen by about 60% from 1972 to 2010. Even though the Catholic population has increased by 17 million people. And that's a shift from 8.6 marriages per 1,000 U.S. Catholics in 72 to only 2.6 marriages per 1,000 Catholics in 2010. The thing is, and this is what struck me as kind of particularly interesting and really speaks to the need for the approach that we take in Just Married, and that's that the statistics show that Catholics marry at about the same rate as the general population. So the general population marries about 53%, Catholics 51%. It's a statistical wash. But more Catholics are marrying outside the Church. So what you have is that Catholics still buy marriage. They're just not buying our Catholic product. And so the challenge here is, how do we establish as Catholics our position in the marriage marketplace? In other words, what makes Catholic marriage unique? And I know that there might be some people out there who are a little uncomfortable with this marketing metaphor, and
we're not supposed to be selling anything.
Yeah, go out and make disciples, not consumers, right? And we realize that we're all called to be disciples, and that people coming to you, you're wanting to transform their hearts and lead them in discipleship, and really form intentional disciples who are having intentional Christian relationship. But this is often the way that people think. We do think in a very commercial way, even about faith. Spiritual seekers often have more of a consumerist attitude toward church, toward spirituality and sacraments. And so even if you don't accept this metaphor, they're coming to you with this mindset, asking, what can you do for me?
Well, and I have to say, for those of you out there who are, family life ministers, priests, people who are the ones on the front lines of saying, no, Catholic marriage is better. Have you looked at what the church is teaching on this? Taking this sort of marketing approach in that suddenly you have the nuggets of why is Catholic marriage, real Catholic marriage, different? Why is it better? Why will it make this person or this couple's life a happier, healthier, holier place? People want to know very quickly, and instead of taking that sort of spiritual approach and saying, well, when you enter God into it, these good things can happen, saying, no, we really know 2,000 years the church has known what it's doing. It's a wonderful thing to be able to have, and this is what it is. And you can show them very quickly and help them to understand the unique difference.
So the reality is, now more than ever, people, the people we're trying to reach, if you will, the consumers in our marriage store, have more options available to them for long-term relationship types than they ever have before. And so what we're going to go through is 5 different marriage typologies of marriages and marriage-like relationships, because the reality is, when people use that word marriage, it doesn't mean the same thing to everybody, and I think that we're all more aware of that now than ever. But it's always been true that everybody's had a different idea of what marriage really means and what the entering into marriage really means, and so it's going to be important as marriage ministers, as adult faith formators, as catechists, to be able to articulate, what does marriage mean to the church? What does marriage mean to you, and how do we bridge that gap? So we're going to talk about the 5 marriage type relationships. First is cohabitation. Then we'll look briefly at civil marriage, spiritually infused marriage, what we'll call. Then fourth is faith-based marriage, and then finally we'll look at Catholic marriage. So, the biggest issue here, the biggest distinction that we want to make, is that what differentiates those 5 different types of long-term relationship are the promises that a couple makes to each other.
Yeah, the vows that a couple takes. The church has never changed the vows that we take, but everybody else seems to these days. And we have kids who seem to like to watch these, wedding dress shows or these wedding competition shows. And one day I sat down with my daughter, and one of them just knocked me flat as the couple stood up and promised before all their families and friends and the facilitator of the marriage. And the bride said, I promise to make you red velvet cake once a month.
And the groom promised, and I promised to take the garbage out when it's raining. When it's raining. He doesn't even take the garbage out when it
and I'm not making it up.
No. I watched it with her.
The entirety of the vows. So now when we have all these different promises that couples can choose to make and write their own vows, it really does differentiate between what the church is saying is marriage, what you're really promising to each other, and what couples are really willing to bring to each other and to God in a marriage.
We tend to think of vows as these sort of romantic, warm, fuzzy promises that we make to each other, and of course there's that dimension to it. I don't mean to downplay that, but there's much more to it. See, the content of the vows in the marriage ceremony is what constitutes the marital type. And it's the vows, ultimately, that tell us what we can expect from the marriage. You can only expect what's been promised, emotionally or practically speaking. And so the nature of those vows in the relationship really have practical significance and tell the couple getting married what they have a right to expect from each other and what they have an obligation to give to each other. And so when we're looking at these differences between these 5 long-term relationship types, it's going to be important to take a look at, how those vows compare side by side. So as we said before, you got your spiritual consumers, the people that we serve, the people of God, have more options than ever regarding the type of long-term relationship they might want to choose. And so what we want to do is be a little bit of customer service here. You go to a store and say you're looking for software, comparing detergent, and you flip the box over and you see, okay, this brand does this, 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 and this.
You have it all checked off as that goes, and then the one next to it, this brand, our competitor's brand, doesn't have any of those.
Doesn't do anything. It's terrible. Ooh, hiss.
You don't like them.
And so we're going to be your customer service representatives here today as we walk you through the marriage store and do some comparison shopping as we look side by side at the various marriage products and marriage-like products that are available for us. So let's take a look, first of all, at cohabitation. And I love this little cartoon.
I love this cartoon.
Yeah. Let's move in together. Do you mean a commitment? Oh, nah, let's just waste each day as it comes. Cohabitation is extraordinarily popular. Nearly half of women aged 15 to 44 years old cohabited outside of marriage sometime between 2006 and 2010. That's up from 43% in 2002, and that's up from 34% in 95. And so you see what, like a 17% increase in the matter of 10 years. It's a huge jump. 15 years, it's a huge jump. The older you are, the more likely it is that you will have or will be cohabiting with the person that you're married to or you're going to marry. When it comes to outcomes here, about 40% of people living together do get married within the first 3 years, while 32% continue to live together, and those relationships on average last about 22 months. About 27% of the other couples broke up before that 22-month period. What you're going to see, though, is a decrease, I think, in that 40% of people who are living together getting to the altar, because what latest research is showing that, especially among college students, there are different attitudes towards sexuality. We hear a lot about the hookup culture. The reality is that college students are not having sex with any greater frequency than college students did in the 80s and the 90s, but what's disturbing is that the meaning of their sexual encounters has changed. In the 80s and the 90s, premarital sex was seen, according to research, as a lead into marriage. I'm going to date this person, we're going to have sex, and eventually that's going to lead to marriage.
In their mind, sort of a pre-commitment before the commitment.
Right. Now, what's happening is that even though college students are not having more sex on average, in fact, they're having a little bit less than students in the 80s and 90s, they don't see sex as a prelude to marriage. They see it as an end in itself, as a recreational activity. And they don't expect that the person that they're having sex with will ultimately propose to them. So there's a very distinct difference in the trajectory of relationship and the attitude toward that trajectory now as opposed to in the 80s and 90s.
Well,
so,
of course, one theory as to why that's happening is because people who cohabitate have a higher tendency toward divorce. So couples said, well, we'll try on the shoes before we buy them. We'll cohabitate before we get married. Well, when they see people who were cohabitating and then getting married getting divorced at equal or greater levels than people who didn't, they suddenly say, oh, well, why bother to even do that? I'll just meet my sexual needs wherever and whenever I can, with whomever I can, and just lead my own life.
So let's talk a little bit about the nature of cohabiting. We said that the different long-term relationship types are distinguished by the character of the vows that the couple makes to each other. In cohabitation, there are no vows exchanged, or there are, if there are, they're private and they're more implicit than explicit. Very much like this couple here that we feature in the cartoon. There's this sort of understanding that something's changed, but what exactly? And so because we're making up the relationship as we go along, we can just as easily unmake the relationship, which accounts for in large part for the higher rate of divorce among couples who cohabited before marriage, because of the attitude toward relationship, which is it's just a private contract. We decide what this relationship means. We can decide when to end this relationship and when it's not personally significant to us anymore. There's a really interesting theory, though, that really, I think, accounts for the breakup of marriages that began with cohabitation or marriages of people who were cohabiting, and it's the sliding versus deciding theory from Dr. Scott Stanley from the University of Denver. And some of you might be familiar with this. He's spoken at NACFLEM conferences before, and he's actually a developer of PrEP. But his sliding versus deciding theory is this, that in the traditional path to marriage had people deciding to enter into different stages of relationships. So we would be dating casually first, but maybe I'd still be dating other people. And then there would be a point where we intentionally decided to just date exclusively, and then we made a public commitment to engagement.
And then we would get married. And so there were moments of deciding at every point, I'm just going to date you now and no one else. We're going to get engaged and prepare for marriage. Oh, we're getting married. And both people were making that decision and getting together. Unfortunately, with cohabitating, that doesn't really happen. You date somebody, and you start sleeping with them, and you're sleeping with them more often, so maybe they'll move in their toothbrush and a clean pair of socks into a drawer. And then they're there a little bit more often, so you give them a couple more drawers, and then they're there for a while longer, and you're kind of like, well, it's stupid to pay 2 rents, so I'll give up my apartment maybe, or I'll keep it, but I'll be here more. And then people start to feel a little bit of pressure because, hey, I'm at your house for Thanksgiving every year, and I guess people are expecting us to get married.
And maybe we have a kid or two by now.
Yeah, that's true too. And so they kind of slide into getting married, and then
there's
one
no decision at any point
no.
there. So with the traditional path to marriage, at each stage, you're deciding to increase your commitment and decrease your options. With the sliding path into marriage, you don't ever consciously decide anything.
It just sort of happens to you, and one day one of you may wake up and say, what am I doing here? How did I get here? I never decided on this. And you can have kids, you can have a house together, but nobody's ever made that conscious public decision to do this.
This is not my beautiful house. This is not my beautiful wife, little David Byrne.
And there's never a way to really own it. And when you don't own something, it's very easy to just walk away from it, having used it all up.
So that's the issue with cohabitation. Easy to make, easy to break. The second type of marriage, well, it is a marriage, that we'll look at here is civil marriage. And you can also consider this sort of personal romantic marriage in a way, because whether you look at the more bare bones, just go into the JP to sign a piece of paper, or you get married by Captain Stubing on the deck of the SS Titanic, it's still it's a civil marriage, but there could be some more personal romantic dimensions to it. And this is the vows that you make here. This is a real step up. I mean, I'm not trying to knock this relationship type because this represents a significant step up from cohabitation because you're actually making some basic public promises to each other. And research really shows that the making of that public commitment has a profound psychological effect on a couple. That we're saying something to the world explicitly. We're making real promises in front of you. There's at least the pretense of accountability and the idea that I'm doing something bigger than me when I make these basic public promises. Now in civil marriage, those basic public promises are community property, that we're going to share our stuff and use that to take care of each other. And then we're going to claim, raise, and provide for our kids. So, our children will belong to us, and we will provide for them, and it won't be a burden on the state. Now, that's historically the idea of civil marriage, more and more, and not just because of the same-sex marriage revolution, but because of the confusion among a lot of heterosexual couples, especially cohabiting heterosexual couples. Civil marriage has kind of taken on a different dimension. Now there's a popular de-emphasis of those basic public promises, and more civil marriage has been reduced to a public ratification of a private emotional state or commitment. I have feelings for you, and I want the state to say that those feelings are okay.
Yes, and I want to invite my family and friends so that I can publicly affirm those feelings and have a really big party about it.
So you have more and more people who aren't even aware, really, of those basic public promises that traditionally couples who were even, have that bare-bones civil marriage agreeing to enter into. Nevertheless, the law is as it is, and whether the couple is focusing on it or not, they're still held to those basic public promises of community property and providing for children. Now, the next step on the relationship pathway here, as we look at these different types of relationship, is the spiritually infused marriage. Now, in this one, this is the one that you're going to see a lot of people coming to you about. This is really where I think the majority of people who say, I want to get married in the church, are coming from. They're ready to make all the promises of civil marriage, that basic sharing of stuff and claiming of kids. And they also recognize that in some way, some kind of undefined way, God plays a role in our relationship. There's more going on here than just us, but we still want the right to define what that exactly is. And so that's where you get the, okay, I'll make these basic promises, plus I'm going to make the red velvet cake or take the garbage out when it rains. You know, I'm going to add my own little personal touch here that represents spirituality as far as I understand it. These spiritually infused marriages, they kind of want the feeling of faith, but they're not really sure, or they might even outwardly reject the responsibilities that go along with faith. And so these are the folks, as I said, that are probably your primary target market. These are the folks that you want to try to grab and say, okay, here's why you want to take that extra step into that faith-based and ultimately Catholic marriage. Because with the, again, while this is a positive thing that you're making some public basic promises and you're adding some personal touches to it, you still have that sense that I'm in control of this relationship. I'm defining the terms of this relationship. I'm defining what it means to be spiritually connected to each other. It all fits into my world, so I can just as easily unmake it at that point when this seems spiritually or otherwise irrelevant to me.
Well, and here's the thing. They're saying I can unmake it when it seems irrelevant or when I get too scared to stay. And so the reason why these are the people you really want to be offering everything the Catholic Church has to offer is because there's something that's hungering inside of them. They're recognizing the importance of God in some way in this union. They might not have ever been told what it is that would be the answer to that hunger inside. This is your opportunity to explain it. God doesn't exist in the same space as fear. So if they're saying, I just want a sort of spiritually infused marriage, I sort of want God here, but I'm going to be able to cut and run when I'm feeling too afraid to stay here if it doesn't work out. This is the time to say, this is your hunger. You're hungering for God. You're hungering for Him to be primary in your life. You're hungering for the kind of promises you really deserve from the other person. You're hungering to give more to Him. And the fear will begin to abate as you let Him more into your marriage. So this is not just a target audience because, gee, they're sort of interested in God. You have to hear that call as a hunger from their souls. They're asking you to fill when they come to you to teach them about getting married.
Now, here's the thing. You know, when folks like this come to you, you don't want to take this kind of looking down your nose at them approach with this. There's good stuff here. You know, they're making these basic promises to each other. They recognize that there's something going on here that's bigger than them. What you want to do, and again, I apologize for the marketing analogy here, but you don't want to downgrade the competition because that makes you look bad. You want to upsell. Okay, it's always easier to sell somebody on dessert once they bought the steak.
Well,
okay?
The fact of the matter is that what the Catholic Church has to offer in the way of marriage is the greatest upsell there is, because it really does meet all of those hungers that we share personally and as a civilization. So there's an awful lot of good that you get to give them in an honest and true way, not in some, lemon selling, used car guy kind of way.
All right, so we've looked at the vows that a couple makes with the spiritually infused marriage. Basically the same as the civil marriage vows, only maybe with some personal touches here. Now we're moving on to faith-based marriage. And this is a radically different model of marriage. When I say faith-based marriage, in Catholic marriage, the fifth type is a type of faith-based marriage. We're going to punch it out because we're all Catholics here doing Catholic ministry. But faith-based marriage represents an exponential jump in the evolution of the idea of marriage. Because here's the thing, although the couple is making all the promises of civil marriage, they're not defining the terms of the relationship. This is the first type of relationship that a couple is not saying, okay, this marriage is going to be what we say it is. This is the first time that couples are going to agree to apprentice and be witnesses to a particular faith community's definition of love and marriage and sexuality. When I get married in the temple, the synagogue or the church, in this particular church as opposed to that particular church, what I ought to really be saying is that I believe everything this faith community believes and professes about love, about marriage, and about sexuality, and I want to bear witness to that to the world. That, by the way, is why we as Catholics consider marriage a vocation. We're living out those baptismal promises by proclaiming to the world that Catholic view of love and marriage and sex. And we want to be witnesses of that. So we're not going to write our vows. We're going to apprentice to the vows you give us. We're going to make the promises you ask us to make to each other because you, faith community, have already defined what love means, what marriage is, and the boundaries of that relationship of what we're obliged to give to each other and what we have a right to expect from each other.
And this is a time where any faith tradition has to take those people who may be nominal in that faith tradition and take that crack in the door where they're saying, well, we sort of like to apprentice. We're hoping it's no more than a 2-hour meeting where you can just tell us what we have to do so we can have the nice worship space to have our marriage in. You may hit those people who say, you know, I just sort of want that, and I'll come back when it's time to raise the kids in my faith. But if you take that little opening and really teach them and disciple them as they're tentatively wanting to be discipled, you can change their lives and their marriage.
Yeah, and by the way, you know, I have another book called Holy Sex, A Catholic Guide to Mind-Blowing, Toe-Curling, Infallible Loving. And one of the questions that I get a lot, and I'm sure if you do, if you do any kind of NFP ministry or talk about marriage or that sort of thing, is, you know, what right does the church have to tell me what to do in the bedroom? What right does the church have to tell me how to live my life in my own home? Well, it has the right you gave it when you got married at the altar, because if you look at the small print on your marriage contract, metaphorically speaking, you promised by standing up there in the church before the community of faithful, in the sight of God, you promised to live out the Catholic vision of love, sex, and marriage. You invited the church into your relationship. You told the church, I want you to define these terms for me, and I want to live up to them and proclaim this message to the world. So when the church looks at a marriage and says, you know, we really appreciate you coming to church and we really appreciate your faithfulness, but, you know, the message of love that you're proclaiming to the world isn't the message you agreed to proclaim, we have to receive that in some humility instead of saying, well, who are you to tell me? I gave you the right to tell me that by getting married in the church. Most of the people that are coming to us don't realize that, but we need to inform them of that so that they understand what they're getting. So let's take a look at Catholic marriage. Okay, so again, Catholic marriage is a specific type of faith-based marriage. And you promise all the things of civil marriage, to share your stuff and to claim your kids, but you also agree to live as the church defines love, marriage, and sexuality. When you approach the altar as a Catholic couple, you are saying, I want what you're selling, Catholic Church. I want to buy into this idea of marriage, and I want to witness it to the world. I want to drive it down the street and show it off to my neighbors. You know, because one of the things about Catholic marriage is that God wants to change the world through our marriages and families. You know, God wants to change the world because every single one of us has a hunger in our hearts. We ache for a love that doesn't fail, for a love that is life-changing and transforming and permanent and meaningful. But I think most people don't believe that it's possible to have that. You know, that's what Catholic marriage is all about, to proclaim to the world that, look, these two people can do this, maybe I can too. You know, there was a great commercial, a jewelry commercial a couple of years ago now. There was an old couple walking down through a park. And the old guy had a little beret and a cane, and he's adorable, you know, and his wife was hanging on his arm. And there was a younger couple walking up behind them. And they got to the older couple, they split, walked around the older couple, and then continued on, and both the woman and the man looked over their shoulder at the older couple behind them. They didn't say a word, but the message was powerful and obvious. You know, we want to be them when we're that age. There's something about the way that couple just held on to each other for dear life, and you know, it was obviously had been through so much, but was celebrating all the love that they had. I mean,
we're still in love with each other, and then the young couple's hands join, and you see the engagement ring
right
on her finger. That these are the promises to live and end up like them for the long haul, through it all, and still in love. And that's something that the Catholic Church offers every couple that comes to it. This idea of a free, total, faithful, and fruitful union, and that's what we're all aching for.
You know, and so that's how the world is going to be changed by marriage. You know, that's why marriage is a vocation, because it's a prophetic witness to the gospel of love. It's proclaiming a very unique message of love. Lisa, as you just said, you know, the Catholic vision of love is that it's free, total, faithful, and fruitful. You know, free means I'm giving everything of myself to you without reservation. I'm not holding anything back. I'm not putting stipulations on it. It's not I'll be in love with you, or I'll be married to you until you get sick, or unless you cheat on me, or unless you hurt me or disappoint me in some way. It's I am freely giving everything that I have to you.
And that goes back to that sliding versus deciding. I am truly deciding this in a free way. Nobody's holding a gun to me and making me do this. This is my choice, and I'm here to do this.
It's a total gift. Catholic love is a total gift. I'm not holding anything back. Everything I am, good, bad, and indifferent, is all yours. That applies to the whole idea of contraception, too. I don't just want the parts of you that make me feel good. I want the parts of you that allow us to celebrate a love that in 9 months it has to be given its own name. I want to welcome children with you. I want to be able to have a passionate, lifelong, fruitful love with you. And that's so every part of me I want to give to you and receive every part of you back. It's faithful. Catholic love is faithful in the sense not just that I'm not going to sleep around on you, but that I'm going to prioritize this relationship. In Genesis, it talks about the importance of cleaving and leaving. We leave our families and we cleave unto each other. That doesn't refer to sexual infidelity. That refers to a different kind of fidelity, the kind that says, I know this relationship is my best chance for becoming everything God created me to be in this life and getting each other to heaven in the next.
And I know that aside from my relationship with God himself, this is the most important relationship. So your needs, your desires, your wants, your happiness, your joys are all top priority for me. And everything else, the families we came from, the friends we have, the work commitments we have, will fall under the importance of God first and our relationship together.
Because there's nothing that rises to that level. I was counseling a Protestant minister once and his wife, and they were kind of just having a friendly argument with me about the nature of marriage. And I was talking about this with them, and he was like, no, Jesus Christ is the only one who can save. Jesus saved me. And his wife punched him in the arm and said, yeah, Jesus saved us, but you have everything to do with what kind of shape I'm in when I get there. And that's really a Catholic sense of marriage, And then, so it's free, total, faithful, and fruitful. When you get married at the altar, you are making those promises to each other. You have a right to expect a love that is free, a love that has no bars on it. You have a right to expect a love that's going to be faithful, that's going to welcome children, that's going to welcome each other totally, completely, and we're going to constantly go deeper. Gaudium et Spes defines marriage as an intimate partnership. We have a right to expect each other to be intimate partners. How many couples do we work with, and you work with, who get into arguments about, well, I don't feel comfortable being that affectionate. I don't feel comfortable being that emotionally open with you. I don't feel comfortable praying with you because that's just too personal. Well, you know what? Get over yourself, because at the altar, you promised to enter into that intimate partnership. And as a Catholic couple, you have a right to expect that from each other.
And when the Church talks about free, total, faithful, and fruitful, of course, when it talks about fruitful, it means the children that you'll have together. But it also talks about those fruits of the Holy Spirit. That's what it's really pointing to, the fruits of the Holy Spirit that will come into both of your lives by living a Catholic marriage with God as the center of it and living out all of those promises. You'll have the spiritual fruit as well as the generative fruit of your life together.
And then finally, of course, we are promising to each other to enter into a union that is representative, that it's an icon of the intimacy between Christ and his church. In Ephesians 5 it says that. So, we have a right to expect from each other the same kind of intimacy that we're ultimately pursuing with God, that total union with each other, where there's nothing held back. And again, in marriage counseling, I run into lots of couples who, well, I don't want to give that part of me. I don't want to do that. And we'll talk more about this in a second, but, again, in Catholic marriage, we don't have a right to say that to each other. We are promising that we're all in, and we have a right to expect that from each other. Those are the vows. Those are the promises. Do you see the extra order of magnitude that Catholic marriage takes over, say, any general faith-based marriage with all these different theologies of what marriage is, or that spiritually infused marriage, which is just what we define it to be?
And a lot of you might be sitting there saying, well, why is this a selling point? We're just making it harder for them by saying, you'll have to give so much more. You're going to get so much more. It's really the only way that a Catholic couple can really find that happily ever after, to help each other be everything they can in this life and to make it in a happy, healthy, holy way to the next. it's meeting the desires on the hearts of both members of that couple that are burning in there that they might not even be able to verbalize. So when you, as their guides in this discipleship, let them know that this is what the church is really offering them, it changes hearts and relationships.
It really does. I had a guy I was counseling as a carpenter, and they've been married for 14 years, and he was setting a lot of these kind of boundaries, these sort of artificial, I'm going to love my comfort zone more than you sort of boundaries with his wife. And I said to him, you got married in the church, right? And he said, yeah. I said, well, the part of that Catholic understanding of marriage that you promised to live out was the idea that you and your wife are each other's best hope for becoming everything you were created to be in this life and getting each other to heaven in the next. And that means in part that you have to receive generously the needs of your wife as an invitation from God to grow in ways that you wouldn't grow if you were left to your own devices. That's the heart of the generosity of a healthy Catholic marriage. And there was a dead pause on the other end of the phone because we do telephone counseling. And he said, why didn't anybody ever tell me that? And from that point forward, it was a transformative moment for him. I just explained the theology of marriage to him, and it had a practical, real-life change.
And later on, you went on to say, if anybody had told me that 14 years ago, it would have saved me so much pain.
So why choose Catholic marriage? Because with a mindfully Catholic marriage, you know what you're buying. My grandfather had a saying, don't buy a pig in a poke. Now, you didn't know what that was.
I was a city girl.
Well,
New York City girls don't know what a pig in a poke is.
You go, back in the day, you'd go to the market and they would put. Actually, when we were in China, remember when we were in China, they had ducks at the Walmart.
Yes.
And they had
live ducks.
Live ducks, a flock of live ducks, and they were all packaged. Their feet were kind of tied together with these plastic straps. You could pick them up and carry this pack of live ducks. Well, you used to go to the market and buy farm animals, and somebody would have them in a burlap sack. Yeah. But sometimes unscrupulous farmers would put a cat in the sack instead of a pig. So you don't buy a pig in a poke because you don't know what you're going to get. So when you're getting Catholic marriage, you know what you're buying. It's all spelled out right there for you. This is what you have a right to expect from each other. This is what you're promising to each other. And when you have a mindfully Catholic marriage, you know what you're buying, you know what you owe each other, and you know what you have a right to require of each other. And interestingly enough, secular research from the Gottman Relationship Institute really shows that when a couple has similar views of marriage and a similar commitment to their vows, not just to each other, but to the promises they made because they see those promises as tied up in part of living out their beliefs and values and ideals, those couples have significantly higher relationship satisfaction, and they can expect greater longevity from their relationships as well. So choosing Catholic marriage mindfully, intentionally, with a clear understanding of what you have a right to expect from each other and what you have an obligation to give to each other gives people the edge. When you faithfully communicate the vision of a Catholic vision of love and marriage and sexuality, you're giving people an edge by letting them know what they have a right to expect, what they have an obligation to give, and what they can hold each other to, and how they can hold on to each other. In secular marriage, though, the picture is very different. And when I counsel secular couples, and we talk to secular couples on the radio, you get a lot of this kind of, well, what does marriage really mean? Who decides? Why is your vision of marriage better than my vision of marriage? When you talk to secular marriage therapists or go through secular marriage programs, a lot of them are very, very good. But the goal, generally speaking, of secular marriage counseling is mutual tolerance. Why? Because you can't get anybody to agree on an objective definition of marriage. Why? Because most people made up their vows. Most people define marriage for themselves, and they weren't explicit about what they meant when they stood up there at an altar or at the beach or whatever and said stuff at each other. In Catholic marriage, I can, as a Catholic counselor, I have the authority to say to a Catholic couple, look, this is what you guys promised to each other. Now, I understand it's hard. I understand you might not be there yet, but this is what you did promise to each other. So let's work on how to find some safe and healthy ways to do that for each other. With a secular couple, the best I can do is say, yeah, split the difference. We'll see how much of this we can get for you and how much of this we can get for you, and go mutually tolerate each other for the rest of your lives. Woohoo! So that's why you want to choose Catholic marriage, because it's a whole world of confusion on the one hand versus, I know this is a completely overused meme, but keep calm and reflect on God's love. There's a truth in this particular graphic, because when you're in Catholic marriage, you can keep calm because you know what to expect, you know what you're obliged to give, you know that you're supposed to be a mirror of God's love. So you reflect and you pray and you ask God to teach you how to love each other the way he loves you from his own heart, as opposed to having to make it all up on my own and us try to figure out how to manage those expectations when they clash. Catholic marriage promises a love that comes from God's own heart and leads back to God's own heart. And it's only that love that can satisfy the human heart. That's a lot of stuff to kind of take in and communicate to people. So that's why we want you to let us help you do this. Because Just Married does not get into the typologies that we talked about today.
Well, that's for you guys who have to lead all these couples through this.
But what it does do is articulates the Catholic difference of love, sex, and marriage in a meaningful, practical, accessible, and personal way. We share our stories throughout the book. It is empirically based. It's rooted in all the good research that talks about what it takes to make a healthy marriage, but it applies that in that Catholic context that shows people that it is possible to live out this Catholic vision of love and sex and marriage in a way that is validated by research and is shown to be effective. And so this is a great way to introduce these concepts to the couples that you work with by walking them through our book. A lot of good people are saying some lovely things about the book. Our good friend Christopher West gave us a very, very positive blurb about it, saying that he shares a deep affinity with us about the way we present the faith, and that our book is loaded with our typical winsome advice that we help newly married couples unpack the great mystery of marriage and discover the divine love story that's behind their own. Every married couple, newly married or otherwise, will benefit from the book, and we really appreciate Christopher saying that. Archbishop Naumann, who's on the USCCB's Committee for Marriage and Family, also said that Just Married should be required reading for every recently married Catholic couple. He went on to say that the POP-chaks provide practical pathways to help couples enjoy the abundant life God desires for them in this world and to help each other make it together to heaven. And that's really what this is all about. How do we help you help the couples that you serve live the Catholic difference in their lives, proclaim that Catholic difference of love, sex, and marriage with their lives? Just Married is one tool in your toolbox. The Pastoral Solutions Institute offers a lot of other products and services. We have some of our other marriage books there. We have several other books on parenting and Christian living. This is our marriage series. You can see our radio program, More to Life, is the only theology of the body-based advice program on radio. It's on about 30 to 35 Catholic stations around the country. You can listen online at avemariaradio.net. It's podcasts there. You can also subscribe to the free apps. We have an iPhone app and an Android app. It's an Ave Maria Radio app. We also offer professional Catholic telephone counseling. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I have several associates that work with me, and we do 8,000 hours of ongoing marriage, family, and individual psychotherapy from a Catholic integrated context. And people can learn more about that by accessing the website and the phone number on the screen that you see there.
But be not afraid. As you go about the job that God has called you to, sometimes it can get so discouraging. You see those numbers going down, those people not getting married in the Catholic Church. How many are getting married outside? The ones who do very small amounts seem to really care about anything but renting that church space for an afternoon. Be not afraid. You know, when you set a couple's heart on fire for the Catholic vision of love, that spreads. That's a fire that God wants to burn throughout the world, and each couple can become that vision of God's love and help evangelize the world. Take it one couple at a time. Be faithful to what the Church teaches us about Catholic marriage. Proclaim it with great joy, great love, and great fervor, and you will change the world with the ministry God has called you to.
Amen. Amen. Let's take some questions now. Get some good questions coming up here.
Good. Well, thank you both very much. I'll take, let me show once again the question section of the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll start taking a few questions. We have a few questions that have come in already, so I'll start to read some of those, and then we'll take some more as they come in, and maybe I'll throw a few of my own in as well.
And just to give you a heads up, I need to wrap up by 2 minutes to the hour because I do have a session calling.
All right, we'll give you a couple minutes for sure, and you can duck out as I kind of finish up with the kind of the technical stuff. So
Sounds good.
Good, perfect. Okay. Well, one more time, because you said this multiple times, I think, but Anna asked the question around the middle of the webinar, so maybe you can clarify one more time about the difference between, or maybe the impact of writing our vows versus, I guess in your words, accepting or the vows of the Church, the Catholic Church, for example.
Again, marriage is how you define it. What you can expect from marriage is what you promise to each other. When you make up your own vows in marriage, you also have the idea that you can unmake those vows in marriage, those promises to each other. When you are entering into a faith-based marriage, whether that's a Catholic marriage or any other faith-based marriage, and you're doing it mindfully, what you're really saying is, I want you, faith-based community, to teach me what love means. It's an entirely different posture. The posture is one of humility and receiving that vision of love from this community, that I'm going to spend my life learning how to live out this vision of love, as opposed to when I write my vows, I already know everything there is to know about this. I wrote it. I'm the expert. I can define it. I can break it. I can live it out however I want. So that's why it's so important, and that's why the church never allows couples to write their own vows, because we recognize that marriage as a vocation is the learning and living out of a unique vision of love that doesn't come naturally and isn't easily learned.
Good, thank you. And I love the 4 words: free, total, faithful, fruitful. That's right in the vows. It's exactly. It's an excellent summary, I think, of those vows. So we have 4 more questions coming in. I'll ask before we get to the other questions. One thing we hear quite often is the kind of the mixed marriages, or couples who one's Catholic, one's non-Catholic, and they're trying to decide, do I get married in the Catholic Church, or do I just kind of get married in a different church or outside, or kind of some of the other places where they might get married? So what kind of advice would you give to somebody who's in a leadership role in the parish, who's meeting with this couple maybe early on in that decision-making process? What are some of the things that they could say to essentially, sell Catholic marriage to them as they're making that decision?
Well, I think that really meeting with that couple and saying, what is it about your faith traditions that you hold most dear? And even if they're saying, well, I like Sabbath meal together, or I like celebrating Christmas, go deeper with that couple. What about that meant something to you? Why was that significant? And begin to draw them towards the idea of what they can have in this marriage with the promises of free, total, fruitful, forever. If you draw their experience into it, there's that hunger in their heart that's going to begin to point back to the kind of marriage that you're instructing.
And be honest. Be honest about what we're offering them. Again, using the marketing metaphor, and I realize there are serious limitations to this model, but you don't ever want to sell somebody something or tell somebody that they're buying something that they're not really buying. You don't want to be dishonest as a representative of your particular marriage product. And so we're honest about what the church believes about marriage and what the church promises and says that you have a right to expect from each other in marriage. And then we give people the freedom to choose to either enter into that or not. To be able to say to a couple, look, this is what we believe about marriage. This is what you have a right to expect. This is what we're going to expect you to give to each other. This is what you're promising. And we really think it's wonderful, and we hope you do too. And then we invite them. We propose, but we never impose. And then if they go, we can't see that as a failure. We have to see the fact that we faithfully represented that Catholic vision of love in the most sensitive and charitable way we knew how as a success. And it's up to the Holy Spirit to do the rest.
Good, thanks. I have 2 more questions. One is maybe direct. The other one's a very deep question, so I'll save that one for just a moment. The simple question is, why does, maybe it's not so simple, why does a Catholic marriage have to be in a church building when Mass can be held anywhere, on parish picnics, etc.? Why is that typically typically a reason, an answer when people ask, can I just have my wedding outside instead of in a Catholic church?
You need to, it's my understanding, I'm not a canonist, but it's my understanding that to celebrate those Masses elsewhere, you need actually permission from the bishop.
Yeah.
That it's normal, if for a marriage to be licit, for a Mass to be licit, it has to be held in the church. Or given special permission by a bishop to have it elsewhere. Same thing is true about marriage. You can have it someplace else. What you have to do is get permission from the bishop, and it's called dispensation of form. So in other words, we can have an unusual form here. We can get married in a different church or on the, whatever, if we have serious reason and permission from the bishop. The reason that you're getting permission from the bishop is not, although people treat it this way, it's not so that we can, get him to sign off on cross our canonical T's and dot our canonical I's. It's so that we can say that we are, even though we're getting married in a different place with this different form, we really are consenting to marriage as the church defines it and wanting to enter into the promises that the church is asking us to make. So we're going into this mindfully despite the fact that our circumstances require us to be in a somewhat different place or that sort of thing. So you can do it, but the reason that the church wants you to get married in the church is because you're making those promises in front of the whole people of God. The church represents not just your family, but the entire universal church. And you are saying to the church, everybody in the church, we're going to live this stuff out. We're going to be living, breathing examples of what you say the definition of love and marriage and sexuality is, and we're going to proclaim that loud and proud to the world. And that's why the church wants you to get married in church.
Good, thank you. That's a great answer. Thank you. I wonder if you can answer this question from your radio show or from your practice. This is from Cheryl. She says, how do you recover that feeling of commitment in your marriage vow after your spouse has been unfaithful and now wants to reconcile? How do you move past the rejection and sorrow that their actions have done in breaking trust and commitment? So,
a wonderful question.
Yeah.
There's a process of healing there. You know, the thing about recovering from infidelity is that it's always more complicated than just ending the affair. Generally speaking, the person who cheated is not very good at communicating their needs or dealing with conflict. That's not universally true, but it's almost always true. And so ending the affair isn't going to do it. And generally speaking, that person who cheated is also not going to want to have to deal with all that stuff because they're not good at communicating their needs and not good at dealing with conflict. So the person who was cheated on really needs to insist that that couple gets serious help for not just recovering from the infidelity, but healing the dynamic between the two so that they can learn to communicate on a different level and so that that spouse who cheated can be more open with their needs and more comfortable with conflict in general. There's a great book by Donald Bauckham, which is it's not a Catholic or Christian book, but it's an empirically based book on recovery from infidelity called Getting Past the Affair. Excellent resource. It's Baucom. But I really recommend that any couple who's going through an infidelity get in touch with a marriage-friendly therapist. When I say that, it's important because every counselor will tell you they do marriage therapy. Only a small percentage of counselors are actually trained in marriage therapy. And of those marriage therapists, not all of them are marriage.
What do you mean by that? I'm sorry. Can you just clarify? Some are not trained in. Can you clarify what do you mean by not trained in?
Well, I mean, they're not trained. They haven't actually gone through any training programs in marital therapy. Like a lot of therapists do training in individual therapy, and then they do marriage therapy, but they haven't actually gone through any courses or done any internships, had any kind of supervisory experience in marital therapy. So you want to work with somebody who's actually been trained as a marriage therapist and has gone through supervision in marital or family therapy, so they know what they're doing. And because marriage therapy is a whole different animal from individual therapy. So if your therapist says, oh yeah, well I've been doing marriage therapy for 20 years. Yeah, but were you trained in it? Oh, well I've done it for, that doesn't count. So you want to find a marriage therapist who's a marriage-friendly therapist. We do marriage-friendly therapy through the Pastoral Solutions Institute. Folks can get in touch with us at CatholicCounselors.com. The marriagefriendlytherapists.com, that's with an S on the end, marriagefriendlytherapists.com is a national registry of licensed marriage therapists who are also marriage-friendly. Great resource. But don't go through infidelity on your own. Always get professional marriage-friendly help.
And when Greg says a marriage-friendly therapist, you want somebody who doesn't just do marriage therapy as a way to midwife you into a good divorce.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of therapists out there who say they're doing marriage counseling, and people come to them with a shattered marriage through infidelity, and they think, okay, we just want them to be happy, and they'll be happier apart, so we're just going to teach them how to have a very calm, peaceful divorce. That's not what
But nobody gets married to get divorced. I mean, I saw there was a commercial years ago that had a bunch of kids, and they were wearing like suits. And they say things like, "When I grow up, I want to be downsized."
I want to be me.
Yeah, and nobody says, "When I get married, I want to get divorced." Look, the reality is marriage is hard, and sometimes it's harder than others. But if a good professional can show you how to do it and do it right, then who wouldn't snap at that? And the thing is, we know now, based on the research, that it doesn't matter where you came from, it doesn't matter what you know and don't know. Marriage, having a good marriage is about learning a set of skills that enables you to relate to each other, and anybody can learn those skills, and anybody can have a great marriage.
Thank you. No one's doomed. I really like that. Thank you very much. I know you have to go, so please, one more time, where's the best place that people can find both of you and your work?
CatholicCounselors.com, 2 C's in the middle, S on the end. CatholicCounselors.com for more information about our telephone counseling practice, books, and the radio program as well. Thanks so much for letting us be here with you today. Thanks. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you. And if I'm going to keep going, but if you need to cut out, please.
Right.
Thanks so much, Greg and Lisa. Take care. Okay, now I hope everybody else will stick around just for a minute. Here's an offer you can take advantage of. They mentioned a couple of times the book that they've published with us called Just Married, The Catholic Guide to Surviving and Thriving in the First 5 Years of Marriage. As always, here's a 20% off promo code coupon for you to use at our website, avemariapress.com. Just use the promo code webinar1022 for today's date, so webinar1022 for today's date, and you'll get 20% off that book until next Tuesday, October 29th. Before we sign off, I just want to say thanks again, as always, to our partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. You can check out Ave Maria Press at avemariapress.com or any of the social networks displayed here on your screen. Finally, this webinar, again, is being recorded, and you can find a recording of this webinar on vimeo.com or youtube.com. And this webinar and all webinars that we've done in the last 3 years will be at avemariapress.com/webinar-videos. And finally, next week, next October 29th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we will invite author Tom Corcoran back for a solo webinar drawing from his experience that he shared in the books that he co-authored, Rebuilt, in the new book, Tools for Rebuilding. Tom will share a presentation titled Rebuilding Parishioners, Moving from Consumers to Contributors, on how to motivate parishioners to become more active members in your faith community. So we'll see you all again next Tuesday, October 29th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Have a great week.